This is the brand new 11th generation Apple iPad. Actually, no, wait, hold on. This is the brand new 11th generation Apple iPad. It looks exactly the same as the 10th generation. In fact, the design is not the only similarity between these two iPads, and in today's video, I'm gonna find out if it's worth upgrading from the 10th generation to the 11th generation, or if you're buying a new iPad, whether you should buy the 10th generation or the 11th generation. And the answer is actually not as simple as you would think. But first, I wanna give a huge thank you to the sponsor of today's video, Delete Me. Did you know that your personal data is sold online by data brokers? Literally anyone can buy your personal details. You have the right to stay private and protect your personal data. It is so important to keep your personal info private, like your address, your phone number, etc., because all of that stuff floating around opens you up to the risk of identity theft, scams, stalking, and harassment. All things that no one really particularly enjoys. I started trusting and using Delete Me this year, and it has made me feel 10 times safer because I know my info is out of the hands of scammers and off the internet. Even in just the first 2 months, Delete Me has saved me about 7.5 hours worth of searching for and removing my personal data from the internet. It would literally be a full-time job for me to do this. In fact, just last month, Delete Me reviewed 599 listings and 105 brokers to make sure that my data was private. So protect your personal data from scammers and general bad guys with villainous agendas with Delete Me. Make sure to use my coupon code Fowler to save 20%. And don't forget that it's important to protect your family too, so make sure to check out the family plan as well, because when a data broker buys your data, they can also see your family's data. So scan the QR code on your screen or click the link in the top of the description below to check out Delete Me, and make sure to use code Fowler to save 20%. And once again, huge thank you to Delete Me for sponsoring today's video. So the Apple iPad 10th generation and 11th generation look identical from a distance. In fact, they come in the same exact colors: silver, blue, yellow, and pink. Before I continue on, there is one thing that I noticed that's different. You don't have the iPad text on the newer version of the iPad. But that's about it. I will say, it does look cleaner without the iPad text. It really does. Not only are the exterior designs of these iPads exactly the same, the screens are exactly the same. The iPad 10th generation first released back in 2022, and this newer version of the iPad released actually just this last week in 2025. So it's been 3 years since we've had an iPad update. Now, of course, these are sort of the budget or the most basic iPad options out there, so it's not totally surprising that we're not getting updates that often, especially because they don't change things very much between the two iPads. And like I said, the screens themselves are exactly the same. Now, you might be able to notice here that the screens do look different, but that's only because I have a screen protector on the iPad 10th generation, a matte screen protector, and I'm just going raw on the 11th generation, so it looks a lot shinier. But either way, they both feature liquid retina displays. Both of their screen sizes are 10.9 inches, and they both feature the same resolution, which of course is 2360 by 1640 with a 264 ppi. They also get up to 500 nits of peak brightness, which is pretty decent, especially when you're indoors. Outdoors, it's not as great, but a lot of devices nowadays are 500 nits, so it's kind of par for the course. Another thing that hasn't changed is the screen refresh rate. They're both 60 Hz, which means they both are fast, but not as fast as a display that's 120 Hz, like what we're used to on our phones or higher-end iPads. That being said, I actually don't mind the display on either of these iPads, specifically the 10th generation, especially because I bought it for as cheap as I did. If you saw my iPad 10th generation review, which I'll link at the top of the screen, you'll know how much I bought it for. But overall, for the category of iPad that you're getting, the basic iPad, I'm really not mad at it. It's good enough. The colors are great. The contrast is great. The resolution is fine. And if you really want a much higher resolution, you are obviously going to have to upgrade to a more expensive iPad. Would I have liked to see some change in screen between the iPad 10th gen and the 11th gen? Sure, but probably not for the price that they would have charged. One thing though that they did actually change between these two iPads was the storage size. Now the iPad 10th generation came in 3 different storage sizes. You had the base model, which was 64 gigabytes, the mid model, which was 128 gigabytes, and then of course the top of the line model, which was 256. On the 11th gen, they've actually upped every single one of these models. Now the base model is 128 gigabytes, you've got a 256, and now a 512 at the top end, which is pretty decent. Now I don't personally see myself using 512 gigabytes on the most basic iPad. I think if I was gonna buy that much storage size, I'd probably be buying a slightly more expensive iPad like an Air or a Pro, but if you want more storage, that's not a bad way to go. But with that somewhat minor difference out of the way, getting back into similarities, the rear camera on the device is exactly the same. It's 12 megabytes and it captures up to 4K video. Now, as I said in my iPad 10th generation review, I don't see myself ever using this back camera. The only situation I see myself using this is either in some app that requires a camera, or maybe if my daughter wants to create a home video or something like that. That's the only situation I see myself using this back-facing camera. If you are going to take photos on your iPad, please rethink it before you do it. Maybe use your phone or something else, because iPad photography is the worst. If you do that, I'm sorry, but I mean, it's the worst going to Disney World and seeing people out there with their iPads out, but that's just maybe a personal thing. I don't know. Maybe you don't care. The other camera that hasn't changed is the landscape camera on the front of the device, which is a center stage camera, which means it always keeps you centered while you're FaceTiming. It's still 12 megapixels. It's still exactly the same. That's all there is to it. To be fair though, it's good enough for FaceTiming. You're definitely not going to be filming any content on the front-facing camera, so could be worse. And like I said in the 10th generation review, I'm really happy that they moved the camera from the top of the device to the side of the device because it makes it so much easier for horizontal FaceTime calls. But now let's talk about another update, and that's the processor that's inside the 11th generation iPad. The 2022 10th generation iPad came with an A14 chip, which is actually the same chip used in the iPhone 12, 12 Pro, 12 Max, all that sort of good stuff. The 11th generation comes with an updated chip, the A16 chip, which is the chip used in the iPhone 15. So in that sense, there is a little bit of an improvement there because you've gone up a couple different chip generations since the last one. That being said, both of these iPads come with a 6-core CPU, a 4-core GPU, and a 16-core neural engine. So this iPad is definitely not going to blow you away when it comes to processing power. And actually comparing the processing power of the newer 11th generation to the 10th generation, you really only get about a 20% bump. Which to be fair isn't terrible, but I kind of would have liked a bigger bump than that because we've waited 3 years since the last update. Another somewhat minor update when it comes to tech specs is that the 11th generation iPad comes with 6 gigabytes of RAM versus the 4 gigabytes in the 10th generation. Again, not a huge bump. It will make an improvement, but it's not going to be a night and day improvement. As for battery, the 11th generation iPad has the same exact battery life according to Apple as the 10th generation. That's 10 hours of battery life. It also still is only capable of 20-watt charging through USB-C and of course no wireless charging. So battery life wise, I mean, you're getting the exact same thing, even though it's a slightly more powerful device, which I guess means that maybe it's more efficient or maybe the battery is slightly larger, but I would assume it's purely efficiency. Bluetooth, still 5.3, Wi-Fi, still 6, and operating system is still iOS 18, at least if you've updated your iPad 10 to the latest operating system. Now, unfortunately, because these are both the base iPad models, they don't come with Apple Intelligence. In order to get Apple Intelligence, you're gonna have to get an iPad Air or an iPad Pro. The iPad just doesn't come with it in general. To be fair though, as someone who has Apple Intelligence on my iPad Pro and on my iPhone, I never use it. I literally just don't. Here and there, I'll ask Siri to turn on a light or turn on a song for me or something like that, but that's the extent of it, and you still have Siri on your iPad. Hey Siri, play Moscow by Genghis Khan. There we go. For some reason, my daughter loves that song. I don't know why. Now, when it comes to Apple Pencil, both of these iPads are compatible with the same Apple Pencils. You can use first generation or the new USB-C Apple Pencils. And if you caught my iPad 10th generation review, you know that I actually love sketching on iPad, specifically with this paper-like screen protector or the, what do you call it in the iPad Pro? Nanotexture. Nanotexture? I think it's nanotexture. But of course, you can still sketch exactly the same on the newer iPad as well. So I guess with all of the tech specs and design differences, although there are none, out of the way, let's talk about which iPad you should buy. Now, if you buy either one of these iPads from Apple, they both start with a retail price of $349. And if you're buying them from Apple for that retail price, obviously the newer one is the way to go because if they're the same price, this one comes with a faster processor, more RAM, and double the storage. Because again, the 10th generation comes with 64 gigabytes base and the 11th generation comes with 128 gigabytes base. Now, to be fair, that's not really a fair comparison because you could buy the 10th generation iPad on sale from a lot of different places like Best Buy, B&H, and Target, all on sale for $270. That right there is a $70 discount. So if you're trying to save the most money possible, the 10th generation is pretty similar to the 11th generation and you save a lot of money. That being said, if you want double the storage size and you want a slightly better processor and more RAM and a device that will honestly be updated longer because this device released now versus this device which released 3 years ago, the 11th generation should be updated for the next 5 years, whereas the 10th generation maybe the next 2 years. So if you want all of that, then go with this newer version. It's only $70 more. But again, if you just want an iPad for your child or something like that, or an iPad that you can kind of toss around, or the cheapest iPad possible, go with the 10th generation. Now, of course, if you already have the 10th generation, then I don't think the 11th generation is worth the update. I would say wait for the next iPad that comes out in the next couple years, or maybe upgrade to the iPad Air or the iPad Pro. I just don't think there's a big enough improvement to warrant getting this new iPad over the old one, especially when you'd have to pay another $350 or however much extra you would have to pay if you traded in your old iPad or sold it. They're just very, very similar machines. They look exactly the same. From a distance, you couldn't tell which one is which at all. In fact, close up, other than the screen protector and the color, I wouldn't know which one is which. But hey, if you have the 9th generation iPad or any iPad that's older than that, then sure, maybe the iPad 11th generation is worth grabbing. Overall though, I think the 11th generation iPad is excellent. I think iPads in general are all really good buys. There are some that are better values than others, but the iPad is a device that's very easy to use. It's a lot of fun to use. It's a great media consumption device. It's great for a lot of different multitasking, and it's surprisingly powerful for the price point. If you don't own an iPad, I highly recommend grabbing one, and the 11th generation iPad is just as good as all the rest. So is the 11th generation iPad worth it? In my opinion, absolutely. Is it worth upgrading over the 10th generation? Not so much. But hey, if you made it to this point in the video, let me know in the comment section down below what features you would like to see in the next generation iPad that will probably release in the next 2 to 3 years. As always, thank you so much for watching. Make sure to subscribe if you haven't yet, and I'll see you all in the next one.